This time on Poll Hub, just in time for the 250th Independence Day, in America anyway, we have a new poll out with our partners NPR and PBS News, getting a sense of what Americans think about America at this noteworthy moment in our history. Plus, we're going back to the last time America had a big birthday, that was the bicentennial, to see what has changed. And as a few of us on this podcast are boomers, we're talking about something boomers are beginning to face and talk about: death. Well, that took a dark turn. Anyway, we finish with a fun fact that is also perfect for the day, 4th of July, and these 3-day weekends. Just a tease, stick around. And hi, everybody, welcome to Poll Hub. I'm J.D. Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
And I'm Lee Maringoff.
Well, happy birthday to America, anyway. And to, Mike Bloomberg, isn't he July 4th? A couple of
Yes.
famous people. Actually, Hillary, my producer at NBC, she's July 4th, too. So happy birthday, Hillary, not Clinton. Anyway, the country turns 250 years old this year on July 4th. And so we thought this would be a good time to ask some questions of Americans about this and what we think about America at this time. I will just pause before reading any numbers. This is a very particular time in our history because of the kind of sectarian nature almost of our politics. It does seem like it would be interesting if this happened in kind of a quieter period politically, but I guess we don't get to choose that, right?
I've been looking for the good old days myself for some time, and I've yet to find the quiet time in American history. So if you have one, I'd be interested finding out when that was. But I will tell you that we did look at some polls, which you indicated in the open, about what was coming around on the bicentennial, which was, of course, in 1976. And one of the questions that we looked at, which that back then was asked by the Roper organization, to look at whether we've moved away and how much we've moved from our founding principles. And I thought it was kind of interesting, actually very interesting, because that was also in a non-quiet time. So we were coming right after, Vietnam and Watergate and some bleak economic times. So it's not the same, but it's a lot of rough and tumble stuff for our system. So what the interesting thing to me was, the people who felt very much involved in still maintaining our principles of the founding fathers, somewhere a little less than 20%. And that was pretty much unchanged. The remaining people had moved. And what they moved was from people back then, 50 years ago, who thought we had moved somewhat away from our principles, to people now who feel we've moved a far distance from our principles. And those numbers combined are in the mid to upper 80s, and slightly more for Democrats and independents, but also Republicans at 79% thinking that we moved away. So the poll shows that at this point in time, we've been down this road before with great doubt in terms of the problems in the functioning of our democracy and the institutions and the trust and all those things that seem to be the ingredients of what we think the founding fathers had in mind. And things are not a pretty picture when you look at the public opinion, although a lot of people still maintain some optimism and thinking the best days are still to come.
Let's talk about some of the numbers that we found in our poll. So 32% of Americans said they are worried as the nation approaches 250. 22% say they're frustrated. 23% say they're hopeful. 22% say they're proud. Kind of a split, across different views of that. And I don't know that they're easily grouped. Pluralities of Democrats and independents say they're worried. 42% of Democrats, 37% of independents. 42% of Republicans, plurality, say they're proud. So I think there's kind of a mushy center there, right? And there's no strong, 85% say they're proud or they're ashamed or whatever. There's a lot of gray area there. And 65% in our poll of Americans said they were either very proud or proud to be an American. So that's a little different than worried. Are you proud to be an American? 65% said they are. 35% said either not very proud or not proud at all. And that was huge partisan divide. 93% of Republicans say they are proud, compared to 45% of Democrats and 61% of independents. And finally, when we asked our respondents to provide a single word or phrase that captures what best defines what it means to be an American, a plurality of Americans, the biggest answer here, 36%, so a little more than a third, offered freedom or liberty. 14%, next biggest, said patriotism or national pride. Other kind of much smaller numbers, rights, constitutional Constitution, that was 8%. Diversity, inclusivity, tolerance, 6%. So, Barb, what does this say about the state of America right now, do you think? This kind of mushy center about how we define ourselves, but this fact that, a majority, and not a small majority, are proud to be American.
I think it makes sense. And when we talk about, whether or not you are proud to be American, I think there's different wording in terms of questionnaires. If we ask Americans, straight out, are you proud to be American? Most Americans say absolutely yes. Gallup has certainly been tracking this American pride for quite some time. And there's no question that I think that we're in somewhat of a disruptive period. And this has really been happening over the last decade. And it's really a time when we have kind of shifted our policy, particularly globally, but, domestically as well, since the 60s and post kind of World War II. The 60s being, the domestic policies. That's what I'm thinking of, not so much as the Vietnam War. But, since World War II, we have had relationships with Europe. We have had relationships with countries around the world that have been fairly set in place over decades and decades of time. And I think that the disruption that we have seen, whether that's just in terms of ideology or whether that's, some feel that in terms of necessity, because globally things have changed to such a degree, I think it's very disconcerting for many Americans. And so you get a sense that there's this distancing and worry that things are going in the wrong direction. Now, this time it's Democrats. In the past, it has been Republicans because they have been concerned about the moral values that we have been espousing domestically. So I think it does somewhat turn with the administration that is in power. But there is no question that we can document the fact that from, after 9/11, when the number of Americans who said that they were either extremely or very proud to be Americans was 90% and was certainly the high watermark to something which is still the majority now, but much lower.
It's funny, Lee, you mentioned when I said maybe if we could move the 250th birthday to another time. Well, the bicentennial was the last big birthday celebration in America. And that isn't the best time either, coming out of Watergate and everything else. An ANES survey in 1976 asked during the bicentennial how proud Americans felt about our 200-year history. This is different than are you proud to be an American? It kind of captures the same idea. 48% said they were very proud of the nation's 200-year history. That was in 1976. But again, 1976 was coming right out of Watergate and right out of everything else. I think your point is well taken. There probably isn't a good time to have a birthday to measure this. But Barb's mentioning of right after 9/11 does get at when the nation is in crisis and it's an external crisis. It's like, a war or an attack or a threat. Is that when we are proudest, or anybody in any country, really?
I assume right after Pearl Harbor, that was also, a time where the country was unified and people of that generation, if you're remaining, lament over the fact that unity is here right now. So I think we are in the partisanship. One of the things that we asked in a poll, and I want to bring Mary into the discussion on this also, one of the questions we asked had to do with whether people think Americans have an adequate historical perspective. And one of the things that we talk about a lot in classes and in some of the political science literature about democracy is that informed democracy is necessary for this experiment to survive. We asked whether people think Americans know too little or too much or about the right amount about our history. And 84% say we just know too little about it. And the rest sort of divide between the right amount and too much. But you're talking about overwhelming majority of Americans think that we just don't know enough about our history. And in terms of our education, democracy, what's going on out here? And are we emphasizing these values enough? Or maybe that's why people think that we've strayed too far from our principles.
Well, two things here, Lee. And one, we talked about this question. I sort of smiled to myself because I'm sure you all remember the old song, Don't Know Much About History. And when I was in high school, one of my books was Don't Know Much About History. It was actually one of my favorite books about history. And so I think there's always been this discussion about whether or not we know our history and how it will help us move forward. And the students that we work with here at Marist, and no, this is not a shameless plug for the education at Marist University, but the students that we work with do have a good grasp of history history, where our nation has come from, and you have a good opinion as to where the nation is going. And because I know my kids are often referred to in this podcast, I do experience it with my older sons, or my sons rather, who are older, that they have gotten a good foundation in terms of American history, especially this year with the anniversary. I will say, though, what I did find was interesting that perhaps you could shed some light on is the question that we asked about whether or not future generations will be better off. And here, many Americans feel that future generations are not going to be better off today than in the future, rather than Americans are today. How can we reconcile that piece of data with this idea of hope and optimism?
But I think that there's an underlying consistency in our values that, we've survived for a while and we'll somehow work our way through as we always have. But I think when we look at the future of democracy, I think people are concerned about things don't seem to be functioning well. And then we can go back to maybe just people don't know enough about it. But Barb, I think you want in, and maybe Jay wants in.
Well, I was kind of reflecting and thinking about the comment we're often using when talking about artificial intelligence. And I know that sounds like a total non sequitur. But Socrates bemoaned the invention of writing, and he argued that this would weaken human memory and create superficial understanding. Now, ironically, we know this because his student Plato wrote all of this down. And so we are able to carry it, through, centuries of understanding. But I can't help thinking that Socrates was also kind of right. Just because we write it down, it is there, but we're not necessarily, keeping it fresh and alive in our minds, and perhaps, our memories, or, just our knowledge about history and historical events has waned a bit because of that new technology of writing.
I would disagree a little bit, Mary, not about students at Marist or anybody in particular. I would disagree that we are well steeped in history, or pretty well steeped in history. Americans are kind of famously, historically, not terribly well steeped in history. Lafayette wrote about it, right? I mean, this was like a long time ago. And you can think about like the jaywalking segments where they just stop, Jay Leno used to stop people.
Well, that's a blast. That's a blast from cultural history.
But you could go way back. You can go back to that kind of man on the street thing was done in other shows and even in radio a long, long time ago. I think we are a very blessed nation in that we have had no direct military invasions or attacks on this country because of our coast, just because, at least partly because of geography. We have, with all of the people who've come in over centuries, created this super dynamic, country in the history of the world, right? It's really different. It's really special. Even people who dislike America write about it being a very special, different kind of place in the history of world civilizations. And I think that we are comfortable in having things just go really well. We may not think they're going well. We may complain about a lot of stuff. But in terms of world civilizations, things have gone really pretty well for the last 250 years. And I think that makes us a little lazy. All of us. I'll say myself too. I don't think that we know as much about our history as a lot of people in other countries do. And that's for better and worse. If you think about some of the things that happen in other parts of the world where people are arguing with other people about something that happened 1,000 years ago, like you burned this castle down 1,000 years ago. You people will never be able to. I mean, come on. It was 1,000 years ago. We don't get tied up in that. On the other hand, we don't actually, I don't think, know our history as well as we probably could or should. It's kind of the classic American thing. Like, we could be doing this, but we're doing this, and it's working out pretty well in the grand scheme of history. I don't know. I'll get off my soapbox now.
Ho Chi Minh, our nemesis from the Vietnam era, used in his documents our Declaration of Independence. And I think that's an interesting sidebar to what you're saying, Jay, about other people looking at us maybe in ways we don't look at ourselves.
Well, we turn now from an aging America to aging Americans. By the end of this decade, the youngest of the baby boomers will be at least 65 years old, with millions of boomers now entering their 80s. As the nation faces this transition, the data show that Americans are a little bit better about discussing death, but they haven't really planned for the end of life. Let's pick up here with some data from AARP from 2023. 83% of older Americans say that they understand the end of life transition, that the end of life transition is an important part of life, and they actually have positive attitudes related to this transition. However, and this is a big but here, 69% say that the topic is generally avoided, even though 85% say they're comfortable with discussing death and dying. And 63% of older adults say that they've had an end-of-life conversation with loved ones, but 36% say that they've made end-of-life preparations, like putting together a last will and testament. This is compounded by data from Pew from just last year that say about a little less than 1/3 of American adults say that they've created a will describing with what to do with their assets after they die. 31% say that they've created a will, or a living will rather, or advanced healthcare directive, and only 1 in 5 have made arrangements for their own burial or funeral. So while Americans may say that they're feeling more confident and more comfortable rather about discussing death and end of life, they haven't really taken the steps to put things in place. So is this a little bit of denial here? Like, yeah, I'm good about talking about death and end of life preparation, but I haven't done it yet. So really, this isn't something that perhaps pertains to me.
Yeah, look, I mean, Western cultures are notoriously, we don't really handle death terribly well. So this is not, unlike the last segment, this is not a particularly American thing. I am among the youngest of the boomers. I'm 2 years off of being the youngest boomer, so I've got a ways to go. But I think that this is kind of expected. I do think there's a broader conversation around death. Part of that is like manifest in things like hospice care being something that is now more widely not just discussed, but people take advantage of it. They avail themselves of it. End of life, like, assisted suicide, for instance, those kinds of things. Those are things we talk about now. I think death has made this kind of big move in terms of how we discuss it. I don't think that means on an individual level we want to really deal with it. I will say I was surprised that only 1/3 of people had a will. Now, then I said, well, who did they poll? And sure, when I was 25, I don't think I had a will either. So if you ask just people over 65 if they had a will, I've got to guess that number is going to be way higher. But I think it's something that we have made a lot of progress on in terms of something we talk about, but maybe not as much progress on in terms of preparing for that. And I think the boomers I do think we have a responsibility to do that. We're the biggest generation in American history until this next one's coming up. And we have been on center stage for a long time, making a lot of noise for a long time. And this would be a really good way for us to make a positive noise, I think, as we, begin to transition. Let's be nice about it.
Lee, talk about that responsibility. You're shaking your head and agreeing with Jay.
Well, anybody who's had the misfortune to have, executed an estate or anything of that nature, or, knows that without that documentation, you got all kinds of problems.
Yeah.
And sometimes with documentation, you can run them up. But the point being, it's almost like a hostile gesture for aging parents not to do this, because they're really sort of saying, I'm not dealing with my own death. Not that anybody has an escape clause, but that, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to help you out either. So I'm just going to slide this all over to you. And that might include businesses. It might include property. It might include, retirement funds, all kinds of things. And to not have that taken care of seems to almost be like a hostile gesture.
Or the burial bit. Lee. That was really surprising that people don't have that. But that's really expensive. And if you don't have that, that's a responsibility right there. I agree with you.
Well, it's interesting. I think I wrote my first will when I was 8 or 9 years old, leaving my dog.
I miss my Barbie dolls too.
No, it was my pet.
Any horses I might have in the future.
And then I had a formal, legal will when I think when I was 25 or 26. Mm-hmm. So I do take a different take on this, because I do think I want to have everything in order. And maybe that's a little bit of a control thing. But I have a lot of friends who's being a boomer, they have their kids, and their kids are very candid. Don't leave me your stuff, okay? Please go through it, sort it out, get rid of it. I don't want your stuff. Make sure it's all organized. Don't leave me that problem. So I think, Jay, as you say, we're a little bit more candid about talking about issues related to end of life. But that doesn't necessarily mean that people make those preparations. I think it has become much more, though, part of family and cultural conversations. So hopefully, people will start planning a little bit sooner. I'm not sure they need to do that at 8 or 9 years old, but certainly,
It's a very dark thing to do, Barbara. Not like you get away with this. I mean, well, what possessed you? And I assume it must have been.
Well, I've always
possessed,
wanted
right?
to make sure that my pets and the animals that
Well,
I
get
had
that.
in my
I
life,
mentioned that. Yeah.
were taken care of, so that
Well,
if I wasn't around.
clearly Barb doesn't have a fear about end of life planning, but Jay, there is some data about what Americans are fearful of as they reach their end of life.
Yeah, also, I wanted to correct. I had the AARP survey we were talking about people who had wills, and I said, at 25, you don't have a will unless you're Barb. It actually was of 45 and older. But even then, 45 and older, I think that people even in their later 40s, that may help explain why the number is low. But still, like 36% seems very low. But yeah, there's other data about what the kind of the worry is. This is from that same AARP end of life survey, which is also kind of a dark title for a survey, in 2023. And topping the list of concerns, and this is for adults over 45, which they call older adults, which I object to. And so one is the becoming a physical burden on family or friends. That's 63%. 58% they worry about how elderly care, how their elderly care would get the care that they need. 53% said the monies, are they going to have money to last for their spouse or their partner if they passed away? 52% were worried that their spouse or partner might not have a medical caregiver. So, the partnership, the helping out thing. And 50% said, what would happen to their pets? So, Barb, you're actually, right there with a lot of other people. I think those fears are obviously real, and especially the costs nowadays with long-term care insurance and all of the things that we are able to do to extend life, but they are costly, and we're doing those things. I think those financial things may be driving an awful lot of this because the numbers are just astonishing. If you start doing that planning, it's just like if I'm not Elon Musk, how do I actually make this work? It does look very, very daunting.
Well, but I think it's important that people think in terms of taking one piece of it at a time. And I think a first step is to think about having a will. And you can even start that online. And if you want to go to Claude or ChatGPT, they can put one together for you in a real hurry. I don't suggest that is your only copy. And your only will. You do need to kind of venture out and actually do this legally. But I think there are ways of just kind of trying to think of take a piece of it and, put down, some of your wishes, because otherwise it is kind of left to whomever is left behind.
Yeah, and I think that you may have to think in terms of not only doing a will, but telling maybe the executor of your estate, like, where is the will? Or you are the executor, and you may, because there's also that part of it. And, doing a will is great. And then, you kind of put it somewhere in your house and, let's say good luck to you on that. Okay, so we're going to make a pivot back to holidays from this previous discussion, which doesn't lend itself to a fun fact at all if you're going to talk about death. But let's talk about July 4th. And Gallup, many, many years ago, 1940s, asked a question of Americans. Would you approve or disapprove a plan to have all holidays, 4th of July, celebrate on Mondays so as to make for a larger weekend? And 51% said, yeah, good idea. And 49% said, no. How can you have July 4th on any other day? But anyway, that was my editorial comment. So
an even split. It's so rare that we have that's almost a perfect even split.
Yeah, I think maybe we should ask this to get an update, though, because there's almost 80 years. Well, it's more than 80 years ago. Anyway, or almost 8 years ago. Sorry, can't subtract.
Well, that's what I was thinking is, the 3-day weekend thing and bundling 3-day weekends for the purposes of making it easier for companies or the government or whatever to employ people and have weeks work out. I don't think that was happening in 1939, was it?
No,
I think that's a post-war kind of invention. So it must have been something that was a topic of discussion.
Futuristic kind of question at the time, but much more real now. So for those of you who are gainfully employed at the moment, I put a comma in there. There's gainfully employed at the current time. What do you think of this idea of sort of lumping holidays and moving them to late for a Friday or a Monday? Mary, what do you think about a 3-day weekend?
I actually agree with you, Lee. It's a little weird to celebrate July 4th on any day other than the 4th, much like, maybe Christmas on any day on December 25th. But how about we give people, a little bit of a cushion, maybe make sure that everyone gets the day after a holiday so that if they're traveling, they don't have to worry about getting home and actually be able to enjoy the festivities.
There you go. Jay, that was a great idea.
This year is a perfect example. So we do not work on July 3rd. That's the holiday because July 4th is on a Saturday. So I think this question asks, would you move a holiday? Like July 4th is on a Wednesday, would you move it to a Friday? But there's the flip side of that, which is when you have a holiday that's on a Saturday or Sunday, don't you want the Monday or Friday? So some nuance in here.
Recover from a holiday seems like a funny concept, but a lot of times that's needed. Barb?
Yeah.
You want a day off to deal with horses and dogs?
Well, I always love to have a day off, especially if I can put a few of them together. But I kind of agree with the crowd. I mean, there are certain holidays that should just be on the day because that is the point. And, to have
like New Year's Eve would be tough anywhere, like the 31st, for example.
And I think that, we sometimes forget about what the holiday is about. When the idea is that we are recognizing something or someone or some kind of an event that occurred on a particular day. And I think that is the purpose of the holiday rather than to have a long weekend or get an extra few days off from work. I know that, we have done those things for convenience, like having a President's Day instead of recognizing a president's birthday. We have moved a number of holidays to the weekend so that people can, extend the festivities or the time they have to relax. But I think, holidays, like Memorial Day, like Labor Day, like the July 4th, are days that we are recognizing something very specific. And the day should be about recognizing those things.
I'm going to turn it over in a second to our super student producers, but I did want to pick up on one thing you said, Barb, and that was the idea of President's Day. Because many, many years ago, and I believe it was in the 1990s, you and I were attending a presidential rally for then Pat Buchanan in New Hampshire. And he had an applause line with the New Hampshire Republican conservative voters, which caught us off guard because we sort of figured we knew a lot about politics. And he did say, and if I'm elected president, I will not have President's Day. I will have Washington's birthday and I think it was Lincoln's birthday on the 2 days that are their birthday. And we're not going to lump them together and call it President's Day. Clap, clap, clap. And we looked at each other and said, that's an applause line. But apparently,
well, also, and it's not even so much an applause line, but it's a presidential campaign issue.
That's right.
In other words, I think we had been to a number of other campaign rallies, and it was focused on more traditional issues that may face a president.
That's true also. Okay, Cassidy, I'll let you get in, and then we'll give AJ the last word.
Well, I think Barb is a hard act to follow, so I'm just going to say I agree with what Barb said. So I think I'd sound bad if I agreed.
Oh, no, Cassidy.
Barb liked if you agree with her.
Did you
So few people do.
Would you prefer to have, a long weekend? It's okay.
I do
it's
love
more
long
beach
weekends.
Yeah, it's more of a beach time.
Exactly,
It's
and
more
for
beach
college,
time.
it's easier to travel. Like, I don't know if you guys know, but this year for Marist, they didn't give us the day after Easter off. So people either had to travel back Easter night or skip class the next morning. So that would have been really nice if we had a 3-day weekend.
I know enough not to go into that discussion. AJ,
Not touching
what
it,
do you think?
Cassidy.
Yeah, I agree. I enjoy a long weekend, but I also think that it's important to celebrate the holiday on the actual holiday. Like that's kind of the whole point. So
Yeah. And that's a good compromise. Both of those last two. But that does it for this segment of our podcast, Beloved. And we will catch up. Happy birthday to America. And we'll see you all next week.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist University in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer.
Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes AJ Gambino, Tommy Rogers,
Cassie Connors, and Molly Goodger.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal accessible from our website.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.